So welcome to the Rural Trespass and Property Access Lunch and Learn today. I'm Joanne Hughes, the Capacity Development Coordinator for OFA, and also in this call is Danny Glantz, who is our Senior Policy Analyst. We also have from M&R, Pegram. So welcome, Drew. I will just let you know that the information provided in this webinar is current as of today. Laws, regulations, and policies may change over time and could render some information outdated. Participants should verify current requirements and consult the appropriate authorities or professionals for the most up-to-date information. So I will introduce our other guest that's on here. Sergeant Jill Johnson started her career as a police officer with Perth County OPP and spent years working with youth in schools and communities covering media and delivering presentations on safety and crime prevention. In 2024, Sergeant Johnson took on the Community Mobilization and Engagement Coordinator role, which has her supporting all West Region community engagement officers. While she did not come from an agricultural background herself, she has developed an appreciation for the dedication of those who work in the industry through her husband. Sergeant Johnson is passionate about crime and injury prevention and looks forward to discussing how we can all contribute to rural safety. So welcome, Sergeant Johnson. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Thanks so much. And wow, I'm blown away by the attendance today. That's fantastic. What are we up to? 224 people? That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me here. And yeah, I just wanted to comment about the introduction there that, yeah, so I currently work out of our West Region headquarters in London, but I do still live in Perth County. And so that's sort of where my experience is and where I come from.
Wonderful.
So we did have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, which we thought, so Drew and I kind of decided to tackle this presentation together, or this webinar, just because a lot of the topics sort of correlate between the work of M&R officers and OPP as well. So we are going to have lots of time for questions. We're hoping that people will be interactive, using the chat, just, you know, trying to get some topics covered that will sort of be relevant to the majority of people or many people. I know that sometimes everybody has their own specific situations, but sometimes it's tough to tackle those in a forum like this because there's a lot of extra information that we might not be able to gather everything in this sort of situation. So, that being said, I did want to touch on the two kind of questions that came up ahead of time. And one of them was specifically asking about squatters and maybe people setting up encampments on private property, which is something that obviously is being seen across the board, more common than it ever has been. So definitely, I mean, in general terms, for a presentation like this, what people need to know is that if you own a property, and someone doesn't have permission to be there, then you can ask them to leave. And if they're not leaving, then, police can come and get involved with that as well. Obviously, it is um, a sensitive subject, a sensitive topic when, you're dealing with people who are unhoused and um, there could be other factors at play as well when it comes to safety. So if people aren't comfortable necessarily going and asking for them to leave themselves, then that's another time where definitely, contacting your local police. And I should have said that too, that, I'm speaking from, the perspective of OPP. But of course, depending on where people live, you might have different police of jurisdiction there. So contacting whoever your local police authority is to help, um, connect with those people. And it might not be something that happens immediately. Sometimes we find, an encampment that has been set up and someone's actually been staying there for a long period of time. And we do have with OPP a group that works with us. A lot of our detachments have what we call MCERT teams or MHEART, or basically it's a mental health clinician that works with our police service. And they'll go out to calls like that and try to help get people connected to services if needed or get alternate housing arrangements so that, we're not just going and if this has been someone's home for a little period of time, trying to get them connected and not just, booting them out without any empathy to what that person's experiencing. So, yeah, that was kind of the first question. Drew, do you have anything to add to that? I don't know, not necessarily from your realm, but
Nope, not really. I thought that was a good one for you to handle, just based on it being kind of more in the police side of things.
yeah, well, do you want to give a quick introduction of your experience as well before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to any work regarding trespassing, I'm typically working under hunting and fishing related regulations. Been dealing with trespassing related offenses on private property for 13 years throughout the duration of my career. Um, Working in Huron and Perth County, it's a major issue that we deal with every fall, particularly during our firearm seasons for deer. It does happen in some of the other seasons that we have, maybe some waterfowl related stuff or turkey hunting related stuff. But definitely the primary issues we will have is during our big game seasons for whitetail deer. And I believe those problems are probably reflected across the southern portion of the province. It won't be specific to Huron and Perth County. Um, but that's kind of where my strong suit is. Obviously, I work on the Trespass Property Act and have a good understanding of that legislation as well. Um, and I think Jill, in terms of your answer with the homeless related stuff, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of how to handle those situations as well. I mean, I think the safest thing is the best response to that is to not put yourself in harm's way when trying to deal with these things. When we have professionals who can come and assist you with them. Um, a lot of times with those situations, people it gets very confrontational, and I can totally understand that because you are the owner of private property and you have the right to determine who is and is not on that property. Um, and we just want to make sure, especially I would always say this, just make sure if you're doing so and contacting these individuals, do so in the safest manner possible. And like I said, oftentimes having police with you is probably the best avenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes they might have things that could be used as weapons. So maybe they've been cutting firewood or hunting tools with them, and yeah, you just don't know what that person's involved with, and for safety reasons, that absolutely makes sense. So, now I do hear that there or see that there's some people having difficulty hearing based on echoes, but one of the advice was to um, make sure that you're only logged in once or try exiting and re-entering the Zoom call. So, um, now, the other question that had come up was a very specific question in relation to a trail that was going through with permission. The trail had been created through someone's property, and then a person has been using the trail, but then digging up some wild. The example was wild leeks growing in on their property. But they think that they have permission to do that because they're using the trail system, which they're then saying is public property. But just because the trail has been designated to go across someone's private property doesn't then change the ownership of the property. So the property is still it still does belong to the owner, the farmer there, and by someone removing things from their property that doesn't belong to them, that would be considered theft. So that's a situation again where the local police need to get involved and make sure everything's documented and making sure that, yeah, if you have the opportunity to identify the person, whether you encounter them and take a photo or setting up trail cameras might be an option as well to kind of like see that person and identify them. But also maybe Drew, we could talk a little bit about signage, indicating, you had a good point when we were chatting earlier about using signs that are very clear to say no trespassing. Do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, so that Bruce Trail question, obviously Jill covered that. Your property is your property, right? And just because you provide permission to allow the Bruce Trail and the volunteers to put a trail through your property for public use does not make it public property at that point, right? You would still have the opportunity to close that trail down. And unfortunately, that does happen, right? We see it with snowmobile trails all the time where someone does something they're not supposed to, and the landlord says that's enough, right? So I have no idea what if there's any contract connection with the Bruce Trail going through private property. I don't know. The only thing I would suggest if you're having issues, obviously leek harvest is probably like a 20-day period in the spring through May that you'll potentially be having those issues. Um, you may have to put additional signage on your stretch of that trail, whether it just be a 10 centimeter or 10 centimeter diameter red dot on some trees, maybe adjacent to the trail. That would additionally show there's no trespassing beyond your trail. As well as you could put signage at your all common points of access, right? No trespassing, no walking off trail, etc. That would just further emphasize to these folks that they cannot the only use of the property with the Bruce Trail is the trail itself. Going beyond that, you would have to they would have to request permission from you to go in and harvest leeks. They can do that verbally. You can provide them permission in writing. Obviously, in this situation, the person doesn't want them doing it. So, additional signage might help the situation, but ultimately, the person is not to use that property. Now, there would be exceptions, I guess, if the entire property is a woodlot. If the entire property is a woodlot, it's not signed, it's not fenced in a manner to keep, livestock in or people out, there would be a requirement for signage. So if that's a situation where this is this property is entirely encapsulated by a woodlot, it would be actually mandatory and a requirement for you to sign your property to keep people out.
And
Yeah,
I
I
did.
think the next question is it's pretty personal question from line. So I think maybe instead maybe she should contact a member service representative or yourselves personally for that one. So we'll move on to Wendy. She says her question is if we place a no trespassing sign or a beware of dog sign, are we suggesting that we have a dangerous place and will we be held as the criminal instead of being the victim under law as a private landowner?
I can say that I've never heard of that happening. Actually, the opposite in that, those no trespassing signs, like we were talking about, um, making it clear that people who don't have permission to be there are not to be there. So, and then I saw another question about liability. If people get injured, you know, if if they don't have permission to be there, I mean, I would say that would probably be a question for, say, an insurance person. But I mean, unless you're setting traps for people, or something intentional or something that you ought to reasonably know that would cause harm to other people, I can't imagine that being looked at as criminal because with criminal you have to have intent, right? So I would say that wouldn't necessarily be the case, but
Can maybe add a little bit of perspective to that too, Jill. So the Occupiers Liability Act is kind of what would govern the liability side of things a little bit more provincially. And essentially, you need to not. I mean, don't you need to not make your property unsafe for people, right? So a lot of that. Say, you might maybe have an open pit on your property, you fence it, right? Or you sign that you have that there, right? Or you don't put barbed wire across at head height for, somebody accessing your property, right? That is where you have those issues. But a lot of the Occupiers Liability Act is eliminated by properly signing or fencing your property, right? So if you are informing people they cannot go on your property without permission, then the issues at hand typically I would say eliminated. I mean, I think there's when you get into court related stuff and civil suits, I always think there are people who are able to find loopholes. But I would say doing your due diligence and signing your property appropriately, um, that would definitely help you be removed from liability. There are other aspects, and I think especially with this crowd, land that is primarily used for agricultural purposes, it's deemed you can't trespass on that property based on that alone, right? So you don't even technically need to sign or fence your property if you're using your land for agricultural purposes. That being said, it's still not a bad idea because people don't totally understand the law the way that somebody who works in it, like myself or Jill, every day would understand it, right? So to further cover your rear end, signage is potentially the most appropriate avenue to help yourself out.
And on that note, we do have an OFA online store and we do have no trespassing signs available. So I will just put that in the comments here, the chat, and you can visit the store if you're in need of any of those signs. They will be shipped right to you. Okay, now since I went all the way down, now I have to scroll up for the next question and find it. Oh, if someone is squatting at any point, do they have squatters' rights?
In the case of kind of what we're speaking of with people like on land, um, again, each situation is very different. Um, but I don't believe that that would be something that would come into play. Now, as a human, like I mentioned, we have people that we work with to try to deal with these situations, less, I'm trying to think of the right term, but we don't come in necessarily heavy-handed. So, like I said, some of these things might take longer than what you would hope, but it doesn't mean that they have the right to be there or that they have now claimed the land as their own in any way. It just means that maybe we need to do a little bit of connection before we can get things resolved in a peaceful way. So I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but in a situation like this, I mean, there's definitely some things that come in when it's like a landlord-tenant situation, where someone has been renting a property and then neglects to pay the rent. But that's sort of a different situation than like the encampment type situation.
Okay, and then the next question covers drones and invading space. So can they throw them out for privacy issues or trespass? Can they just like, if they have them, can they throw them out?
Like if a drone has landed on the property
Well, I'm
or
assuming going over, right? Like they happen. And every once in a while you find a drone, a suspicious drone, over your property.
hmm. I mean, I would say that that's something that definitely needs to be reported and investigated. Collecting as much information as possible about that. I mean, if there's vehicles there, if you can get pictures of it, if you can call it in while it's happening, and then we can do some more investigating about it to try to deal with the person. I
And I
mean,
guess you probably have to be careful too, because I did also hear from a friend that they had um, dealt with a drone that was over their property and then found out it was delivering packages. So, maybe it's not one that's suspicious.
that's
I
right.
don't know.
Yeah, and that's why you got to kind of look into it, and I wouldn't suggest doing anything like, shooting it out of the air or anything like that, right? That would be extremely dangerous and, damaging someone else's item, even though it's,
And illegal, yeah.
yeah. So there's a lot of things with that, but I could see that as being someone's response if they were to get annoyed with it. But that's why contacting the local police to deal with it Do you have anything else that you know about drones, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing here is airspace isn't private, right? And I know that is it's commonly maybe argued or pushed back against, but like airspace isn't private. So people flying over your property with a drone isn't necessarily, and I mean, there may be other privacy invasions that are going on. That's why Jill suggests you report those to police. But I think some everyone needs to consider is drones are extremely accessible now, and so many people have drones. Whether it be government agencies using it for enforcement purposes or for private people taking videos, photos, real estate agents flying over properties, set properties up for sale, right? Get complaints fairly frequently, and it seems to be increasing from the deer hunter's perspective, where somebody's out deer hunting and a drone flies over and is interfering with their hunt, right? Or they've shot a deer, they're retrieving it, and the drone's watching them. It's just bizarre situations. I don't have an answer for it yet as to what it is. I have been accused as being the person with the drone, because people do know that the MNR has drones for different operational purposes, and I can say certainly the times that I've been accused for it, it was had nothing to do with us. So I would imagine it's private related drone, right? Um, Whether it's a neighbor issue or whether it's somebody else, just I don't really know, but it definitely is. It is common, and it will continue to be increasingly common as you see the price of drones and availability and accessibility increase, right? So just be aware of it. Report it, like Jill said. That's the best way to do it.
So the next question is, we have been having issues with land surveyors on our property, destroying our crops outside of the township boundary. I have informed them to get out and seek my permission first. It has not happened. Any rules pertaining to the surveyor coming onto farmland?
I'll say I don't know a whole lot about that one, to be honest. How often would they be coming out? Is that something that happens regularly? Anybody know?
Maybe in certain areas?
Yeah, I mean, if the surveyor's from like a private company, you can always reach out to the company themselves or something. But I mean, if they're damaging your property, again, like if they're there, you could obviously contact police and they could come and talk with them, get their information, get their if you get their license plate or something, if they have a vehicle there, and to be able to report it and then take photos, document what's happened. I mean, that's a huge thing for us when, something gets reported, even if they do leave, if you have the license plate and you've taken photos of the damage that's been done, then certainly it's something that can be looked into.
Yeah, I think surveyors do have a level of right of access. I have a couple buddies who are surveyors and work for different surveying companies, and I mean, ultimately, when you're surveying property boundaries, you're right on the property line, right? So you have to access one way or the other and move around to figure out where some of those corner posts are. So I do believe there is a level of right of access, similar to what like a Hydro One would have with hydro corridors to try and locate these things. And whether your neighbor is trying to find their property boundaries, or the municipality is trying to extend roadways. Sometimes the roadway is 3/4 to the other side of the right of way, right? And it might appear as though they're in your crops, but it's actually municipal property. So there's just different things to consider and think about there. But again, if you have concerns, I think Jill's spot on. I think you just report it, and that might help get the answers that you need.
Okay, so I think I know the answer to this next one, but I will share it. Does the whole property have to be signed to enforce trespass?
I can answer that one quite
Yeah,
easily.
go ahead, Drew. Yeah.
Yeah, so your property only needs to be signed at all common points of access. So if you have, regular farm access lanes that go into farm fields, if you have trails that go into access your property, bush lots or whatever, that's where the signage has to be. It has to be clear and visible during daylight hours, right? So that's essentially it. So that could be the signage where it says, it's the big OFA sign that says no trespassing. It could be a red dot that's 10 centimeters in diameter, like we spoke about. It could be a yellow dot that's 10 centimeters in diameter that says some things are allowed, some things aren't, and that's what triggers somebody to go talk to the landowner. But the biggest thing is it doesn't have to be signed every 10 feet or anything like that. All common points of access need to be posted.
The next one has to do with liabilities. I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but can you talk about the liabilities, I guess, if you give permission or you don't give permission?
I think that one was kind of the one we had touched on earlier. I kind of spotted it earlier, and we kind of just touched on the hazards around your home and taking reasonable steps to make sure there's nothing dangerous there.
Okay. Let me just see here.
I've seen a few comments about signage and things being destroyed. Anytime somebody's destroying property that doesn't belong to them, it's called mischief. It is a criminal offense. So again, if you have any sort of evidence or, report those things. And I know sometimes people, they don't, they maybe feel like they don't have any evidence to share. They don't think it's going to get solved by police, but reporting it is helpful because then it lets us know what crimes are happening in different areas, and it helps to document those things. So say you've had five different incidents, repeated over time, then in a certain area, maybe there's been 15 of the same things. And it tells the police in that area that, well, maybe we need to spend more time patrolling that area to tackle that issue. And the same goes for other types of crimes too. But again, if you have things like trail cams and you're able to get any sort of photos of whoever might be coming and damaging these signs, doing things like that, but just making sure that yeah, you are reporting it. Even like for OPP, we do have an online reporting tool, so you don't even have to call us. Sometimes people don't want to waste our time for something more minor, but honestly, getting it documented and getting an investigation started, because then maybe the next time somebody actually gets caught doing it, and then you have that record of this being not just a one-time situation.
Um, so there's another one. I think we've kind of gotten into this, but question regarding people walking onto private land that is a waterfront home and going fishing from the shore, dock, etc. If someone gets hurt, and if it's, I guess, on private property, again, signage, right?
Yeah, so this is obviously one where you'd call the MNR if you have trespassing concerns over fishing, right? We would deal with that under Section 10 of the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act. Trespass for the purpose of fishing. It's just got more teeth than the Trespass to Property Act charges itself. Higher fines just based on issuing a ticket. We also have better avenues for potentially summoning somebody to court. Now, again, a guardrail. Is it a guardrail that was placed to keep people out? That could potentially be signage in itself. But again, signage is definitely worth using. Again, and if it's waterfront property like a lake or a river, really good chance the bed of that water body is publicly owned. So if the people are walking in the river there or the lake itself, there's potential that they're not committing a violation. Obviously, if you're aware of your deed, like if you pull up the deed for your property, you may know that you own some of that private lake bed or river bed, and that would be helpful in MNR OPP following up and conducting investigations. That being said, the water itself is not privately owned. Water flowing through, and even in a pond, the water surface itself it's public, right? So if people are able to access, even if you own the bed of the water body and someone is able to access via floating, they come in on a float plane or dropped in a boat and a helicopter, they could float in the pond all day, right? And it's totally fine. Not super realistic, but we do get these questions, especially when people have ponds that butt right up to municipal right of ways. These questions arise, right? So typically not violations until they touch the bed of the water body in that situation. But yes, if you have specific concerns, call your local M&R tips line, and have a conservation officer can come out and have a look at things, right? And potentially they're like, yep, that's a violation, or they can provide you specific advice on how to look at it.
And then we have someone talking about the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety Act. Does any one of either of you have information on that, or I know that Danny does.
Yeah, it's not something that I've ever really encountered before, but seems like it's a good law for protecting animals and food processing locations.
Danny, are you able to pop on?
Yep, I'm here. Is there a specific question having to do with the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety Act?
It's
Because there's,
not.
yeah, so I did answer one of the questions in the chat, so I do apologize if there's some background noise where I am. So Ontario does have the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety Act. And that act was specifically created to address biosecurity risks and unauthorized entry onto farms where animals are located, livestock and poultry. And there are three different main aspects to the act in which areas are protected. The majority are areas where livestock have been, are, and will be kept. So those are inherently protected under the act. And those are the main ones that you deal with. So the act is similar to the Trespass or Property Act, that nobody can enter that without consent. You do not need signage to indicate that. It is just automatically protected under the act. And then there are compounding penalties for anybody caught trespassing within an area that's indicated by the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety. We do have a great fact sheet on it. I'll pop that into the chat. But if there is a specific question, I can help address that specific situation. But it is, I know it's a very general answer to a very general question. So happy to answer anything more specific than that.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, this is Sheila Finn. I asked that question. I have that specific problem of constantly by neighbors having them trespass on my property. They shoot fireworks off of drones at my sheep and my lambs. The police have come. Unfortunately, very few even have any knowledge of this piece of legislation that came into force in December of 2020. And now I am into court action, and you will see further on that I have a question that says, how do I obtain the notes and the documents from the police officer's visit to my property so that I can use them in my court action? And how do I summons that police officer who attended at my property? And the same question will go to Mr. Pegram, who is the conservation man, because I lost livestock. I had half a dozen to a dozen lambs killed because of this incident, and it has gone on. And I had the Ministry of the Solicitor General from Inspector of Animal Welfare. He also attended, but again, for me to be able to get the notes or to subpoena them to appear in court so they can testify, how do I do that? Please, either write it in the chat or have somebody from OFA send it to me. I am an OFA member. Leah Ames is my member services person. She is well aware of these problems. But yes, please help me.
You've gone through all of that. It sounds awful, Sheila. If you're looking to, if it's a police occurrence that you're looking to get the information from, there's something called the Freedom of Information Act, and there's a request that you can do. So if it was an OPP,
it was OPP, not a Wasaga division. Thank you.
So on our website, there's a spot where you can go in and do a freedom of information request, or there's information about how to access it anyway on there. I think it's like a $5 fee or something to go through the process, and then they collect all the documents pertaining to what you're asking for, and then they send that to you.
Okay, I have limited computer skills. If I drive into my OPP detachment office here in Alliston,
They
what
they
would I?
they can't do it there. It's done through a third party. So, I mean, if you have other people that you know who maybe are more able to do some of the research on the computer, but another option could be a local library. I know that they're very helpful when it comes to online things like that.
Okay, sorry, I had my
Yeah, and sorry, Joanne, if I could just add a little bit to that. Thank you for that, Jill. That's super helpful. So I did pop in the chat the ministry page for FOI requests. There's the links to all the forms and the proper channels. And as Jill did mention, Sheila, unfortunately, that is done through computer for the most part. There is a phone number on that website that you can call, and they might be able to help you through the phone line. The other issue that you had mentioned is that a lot of the police enforcement units are not super familiar with the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety Act. That is an issue that OFA has encountered multiple times. I do not envy any of the OPP or municipal staff in having to remember all the laws and the minutiae enclosed in those. So OFA does have meetings with municipal and OPP detachments to inform them about the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Safety Act. So we're always happy to try and organize that with the police enforcement units in your area. It was common when it came into effect, but it has slowed down just as awareness increases, but we're always happy to do that as well. So Sheila, I'd encourage you to reach out to Leah and she'd be happy to organize that for you, and it'll come back to me and Janine as well, and Joanne, and we'd be happy to facilitate that. And also Drew and Jill, that's something that we offer as well. If there's any interest ever that you hear about that, we're always happy to host an information session just on the nitty gritty details of that.
Wherever she's from, she doesn't think they understand her rights, but like they're.
Okay, I just need to get back to the chat here and see what question is next.
I see one from Rob Whitaker that is a pretty good question there. I think he was right below that that question Sheila just asked.
Does the same hold true for you, Drew, about how I have to go about to get information from an officer who attended my property and I wish to have his notes and make him a witness?
If you had a Ministry of Natural Resources conservation officer attend your property, yes, you would have to go through the FIPA request process. Then there are requirements to subpoena people to court if you're wishing to have them testify.
Actually, his business card that he left says he's Ministry of the Solicitor General, Public Safety, Animal Welfare Services Central Region.
Yeah, so Sheila, that'd be an AWS inspector that attended your property, which would make more sense. We don't deal in livestock with the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Yes.
The only situation where we would deal with a farmed animal might be like red deer or farmed white-tailed deer or farmed elk, right? So that would, and that deals mostly with escape. So your situation doesn't apply a ton to the Ministry of Natural Resources. And I wish I could help you, but I can't make a lot of suggestions for you.
Okay. Sheila, the FOI requests, they are the animal welfare inspectors and the animal welfare branch of the Solicitor General Ministry is subject to FOI requests as well. They are employed under the ministry and under the government, so they are subject to those FOI requests too. So if you go through that panel, you'll be able to get that information.
Who is the occupier, the landlord or the tenant? Who has the final right to allow access?
I'll answer that based right off of the Trespass to Property Act here. So The definitions under Section 1 of the Trespasser Property Act, an occupier includes a person who is in physical possession of premises or a person who has responsibility for and control over the condition of premises or the activities there carried on or control over persons allowed to enter the premises, even if there is more than one occupier of the same premises. So typically, the landowner is the landowner is the landowner in this situation, and the landowner being the occupier can, essentially say somebody else is the occupier and say you have the authority to provide permission on my farm, right? And you might see this in rental situations where private landowner owns 200 acres and they rent 160 acres out to a farmer. The farmer pays that farmer rent, and the landowner themselves says, "Yeah, if someone comes and asks you permission to hunt waterfowl on the fields, as the renter, you have my permission to give permission out." And I would say ultimately that comes back to whether the landowner has had that conversation and agreement. These are typically dealt with through if I ever get a call or a complaint, the way these go is that the landowner says, "Oh yeah, I've got no problem if the John Smith who rents my land gives permission. I didn't know he was the person that gave permission. That's fine." So the landlord, I think, I mean, same thing. That'd be your owner, and a tenant would be somebody who's appropriately paying to either live on your farm or use your farm. I think would probably be the best way to interpret that. But ultimately, the way I look at investigations from my side of things is that the landowner themselves is the primary occupier, and they're the ones who can kind of designate other occupiers of that property. Does that make sense, Jill?
Absolutely. Yes, you nailed it. Now, I did see one question that I wanted to make sure that we kind of addressed a little bit before we run out of time, because there are a ton of questions. You guys are awesome. This is great. But the question was about making a citizen's arrest. And while that is possible, we kind of touched on safety earlier. And if someone's trespassing or whatever the situation might be, you don't know what the person might have in regards to weapons. Um, you, I mean, whether it be knives, firearms, whatever. But also you don't know if that person has been using substances. You don't know if they're, living with any sort of mental health conditions that you need to be aware of. You don't know if maybe they're fleeing from police or whatever the situation is, right? So it is extremely dangerous to do that, is my point. And some of the questions that we also get are about how much force people can use when trying to protect their property. And I'm familiar with situations where, someone's been caught breaking into a drive shed, and then that person ends up with some pretty serious injuries. Unfortunately, it is possible for the homeowner to end up getting charged in a situation like that if someone ends up with injuries, because the way that the laws are written in regards to being able to protect your property, it's reasonable amount of force. So what a reasonable person would say is allowed, and that's somewhat vague and up for interpretation, but it's not something that you want to risk, right? And especially when it's property crime related. Obviously, if someone's being hurt or, if it's a very violent situation, something like that, that's a different situation. But if someone's just, I don't want to say just, but you know what I'm saying, comparatively breaking into a property or trespassing or something like that, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you end up in a lot more trouble. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that got addressed.
Right. Give me a second here. There was one about snowmobiles. So they're not on a trail. They don't have a trail that goes through their property. But they do have open fields that people seem to like to rip through without permission. So far as going between our home and our barn across the driveway, we have electric fences to keep livestock in. If someone gets hurt, um, on one of our fences, are we liable for the injuries?
I don't have a solid answer on that one. Drew, do you know more about
I mean,
that
it's the same
kind of
thing.
thing?
If
Yeah.
it's agricultural land, they agricultural land is under cultivation 365 days a year. Because different farmers use different farming practices, to whether they've got winter wheat, whether they've got cover crops, whether they've tilled that land to get frost penetration, whatever else, right? Maybe they've got it in CRP to allow for regeneration of regeneration of the field, right? Those are all different forms of cultivation. So the fact that if the person's cutting across your farm field and they don't have permission to be there, it's the same thing, right? They still do not have the authority to be there. Where I see a lot of this is where, your neighbors, all the local kids, they'll go ditch banging, right? They'll be bombing down the ditches, try and stay within the municipal right of way, and they'll have to cross driveways. Um, Obviously, if they're within the municipal right of way, they're probably okay to do so. Um, but as far as like going onto your property, if you are on an primarily agricultural property, they can't do that, right? Again, if it's a recurring issue, though, signage might be required to help yourself in keeping these people out and help law enforcement with investigations moving forward. I guess it doesn't really speak on the liability side of things, but when you go to liability again, signage will definitely help you with the liability. And you don't want people running through your fences and breaking fences, and all of a sudden you got cattle out, right, running across roadways and stuff, because that's a public safety issue at that point. So
Mhm. There are quite a few questions here still. Um,
I'm good to stay on as long as you folks feel is appropriate. So
okay. There is one about access for municipal inspection, property standard complaints, building without a permit if they have animals and are not cooperative.
I have answered the municipal one several times in the chat. So just as a general blanket statement, municipal bylaw officers under the Municipal Act are allowed to enter private property without permission to conduct an inspection or to investigate a complaint. And they would not be considered trespassing on regular farm properties or under the Securities and Trespassing Protecting Food Safety Act, except with minor details, minor exceptions. But in general, they are allowed.
Okay.
With one exception, Dana, that you need to add, if the property is posted that this is a biosecurity livestock facility, they can only enter if they are in full biosecurity garb.
That is actually not the case, Sheila. They can enter, they just have to follow biosecure protocols.
If my farm, and I've gone through the courts on this, thank you, and in my township, they are not allowed to enter into my property because it is posted, the gate is closed, and without being in full biosecurity clothing. Boot.
We can discuss that offline, Sheila. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the next question is, if a sign posts no trespassing and no hunting, does that restrict the activity of hunting by everyone, including the owner of the land?
yeah, I can answer this one real quick. We discussed
Mhm.
this one kind of off air there. Super common misconception. No trespassing signage only applies to those who don't have permission, right? So if you have provided verbal permission to a friend, a family member, obviously yourself, it's your land, you can hunt on it. That's not an issue. That has definitely spreads around that rumor, but 100%, if you provide verbal or written permission, or however you decide to give permission to a person to go on your property, even though it's posted, they can absolutely access your property.
Okay. One from Karen here. Does signage for liability protection include signing that there is a livestock guardian animal which might kill a wandering dog? We have a history in the area of roaming dogs and very little responsible behavior from the owners.
I
Go
have a
ahead,
little bit of
Danny.
an answer for that, sure. So that there is a piece of legislation, it's called the Protecting Livestock and Poultry from Dogs Act. Any dog wandering onto private property that is not under the care and control of their handler is liable for any damage that happens to the livestock on that property. And that is a municipal situation. So you would go to your municipality with that issue, and it would be dealt with through the municipality.
So I'm gonna say that I have appreciated learning from all of you today, and I had no idea that there were so many different acts and laws that I am unfamiliar with. So there's some comments about, local police not knowing all of the legislations, and it's 100% true. It's impossible to know all of these things. You obviously have really good contacts here who know a lot about the very specific laws that relate to, very specific situations. But it's making me really want to connect more and learn more about these things. So I just wanted to throw that in there. That thank you very much for all of that. Knowledge that I'm gaining today too. So cool.
Well, we're always happy to discuss, but just for the participants on the chat, we always do encourage you guys to be super familiar with the acts because like I said, Jill, Drew, and their teams have so much to know. They can't know the details of everything in and out. That's our job of knowing what laws apply to us. So we always encourage the participants in our membership to be as familiar with acts that would apply to them. And that is what your MSRs and your field staff are for. And that's what OFA is for as well, to help you guys know what laws apply and when. And so I encourage you to become familiar with your local MSRs, who can become familiar with the local police departments in that area as well. And we're always happy to share information and learn each other. But an informed person can come to them and say, Livestock and Poultry and Dogs Act applies here. Can you help me? And everybody will be happy to help.
Hi, sorry, I just want to clarify what I was actually asking was if somebody tries to make me liable for their dog having gotten killed. Like I know
Okay.
that the owner is liable if their dog injures my livestock, but I now have a guardian animal that will kill a dog if it gets in among my sheep.
Yes, you would not be responsible for that. That is a working dog, and working dogs have a set of different rules. I'm happy. I can put my email in the chat for you, and I could talk to you a little bit about the specifics offline. It can get a little detailed and a little bit convoluted, so I'm happy to continue that offline. But your dog, you would not be liable because it's a working dog and their job is to protect the livestock. They wouldn't fall under any kind of aggressive dog bylaws. That is usually where the liability happens.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. There's one which I guess we can kind of like, this one is more specific, but if she says, I have an issue with a hunter setting up a stand at the limit of the property outside, but facing clearly hunting my ground. What are her options or his options?
Yeah, so again, fairly simple answer. If the tree stand or blind or whatever the situation is set up on the other person's property where they own or have permission, it's not a violation until they actually go on your property or shoot onto your property. Once they've done that, it's a violation of Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act, Section 10(1), trespass for the purpose of hunting, right? And you just report that to the Ministry of Natural Resources. I do see this relatively frequently. And you know what the person's long-term intent is, but until that violation actually occurs, they're just sitting right beside your farm, unfortunately, right? So just keep an eye on it. Obviously, if you see like maybe a shot shell wad or blood in your field, right? That tells part of the story, and that would be a good time to call the Ministry of Natural Resources to follow up with an investigation. We have lots of tools to help us deal with that situation. So, but yes, again, not a violation based on what you've said, but a likely violation to come.
So, just because it's 1 o'clock and I know where some people are going to be heading out, if you scroll right down to the bottom of the chat, I just put in the contact for all the member service representatives, OFA member service representatives around the province, and then my own contact information. So, if you are looking for more information, we didn't get to your question, feel free to send us that question, and we will do our best to help you out. I know you said that you want to go, you can go a little longer. I haven't really looked at any more of the chat questions. Um, is there anything in here that we haven't covered? Here's one on animal activism. Animal activism has been an issue with on-farm trespass, moving beyond signage for both trespass and biosecurity, taking photos and publicly spreading misinformation. Local police would not get involved, as they said they had to trespass twice before any action could be taken. This is not acceptable, and intervention from OFA created a different result. Are there any new developments to support egg in this situation? That's probably a Danny too, maybe.
Well, I don't know too much about that situation, but I do know that the OPP has what we call our provincial liaison team, and they're the ones that get involved whenever there's any sort of controversial issues coming up or potential for, say, demonstrations or things like that, and they reach out to organizers of, whether it's a big event or any of the ones that are political or religious or anything with activists and situations like that, they can become involved and try to communicate with both sides and try to resolve things in a way that doesn't result in any, you know, especially injuries and things like that that can come up in these types of situations. But um, I guess it would depend on the level of what it might be, but it is a resource for us to have our members from the PLT team reach out and connect with organizers from the activist group and from the agriculture community and kind of figure out what's going on and try to resolve things that way.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to touch on that you can think of?
There was one Joanne story that came up repeatedly, and I'm not familiar with it, so it's probably directed more towards at Drew for M&R, talking about just the right to retrieve for somebody that's hunting. Maybe that's something that you could just quickly touch on before we wrap up.
Yeah, just saw that one actually in the chat. There is no such thing as a right to retrieve. There are retrieval requirements, so you don't allow your wildlife to spoil. But when it comes to private property, the right goes to the private property owner. So if you shoot a deer on property you have permission to be on and it runs across a fence onto somebody else's property, you are required to get permission from that person before you go retrieve. That's just the way it is. Whether you like it or not, you do have to do that. That's the proper process. If you get caught retrieving, for example, a deer on someone else's property, and you haven't got permission to retrieve that animal, you would be liable to be charged on the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act for trespassing for the purpose of hunting. That being said, speaking to landowners and farmers here, I don't think a lot of people just want a rotting deer on their property because they've told somebody no. So consider those things when someone comes to ask your permission to retrieve a deer. That deer is just going to spoil, and that's an unfortunate situation for everybody. That's going to give the hunter who shot that deer an opportunity to go out and harvest another deer because they have not been required to use their deer tag at that time. So it can contribute to population issues. Um, a lot of times you can accompany the hunter to retrieve the animal so that you know they're not going to continue to hunt and shoot other game wildlife on your property. Um, you can require the hunter to retrieve go on without a firearm. You can require the hunter to go with only one person, go on their own, or go with one other person to track so it doesn't turn into an entire hunting situation. Um, but the best practice and the legal practice is to get permission from the property owner to go retrieve.
Perfect. All right, I think we're gonna wrap it up now.
Can I ask one last, Joanne, to
Sure, go ahead.
you guys? Jules here. Yeah, I put it twice. It's about the Alto folks coming on from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning, 7 to 8 drones over in the properties in St. Isidore, Castleman. Um, the police was called, and even though it's Alto, they denied it. So, what's the process? What do you suggest at this point that can happen? Because there's nobody who's going to go with 7 or 8 drones at night because the people have told them you're not allowed on my property. So they come in at night when people don't see them. They come in and survey or something we don't know about. So what's your suggestion?
So I'll admit I don't know a whole lot about the Alto situation. But I know Drew was talking about drones earlier in airspace. Drew, do you want to revisit that a little bit about kind of do you know what the regulations are? Like nighttime drone operation? I'm not sure what the rules are on all that stuff.
There's two aspects to it. There's a transportation licenses that you got to go. So you got to go about it's 105 meters, and you're probably allowed to go up to 15 more if you have a building to go over. This is the transportation thing, but where it hits the bag, it's the privacy section. I'm not talking me and my wife, in the pool or something. We're more talking. I'm a maple syrup producer, so I have equipment. I have a bunch of things on my maple bush. Um, some of these farmers have equipment, so like there's a privacy thing going on here. That and even though you've told Alto we don't want you on our property. So they come in with those drones, they survey. We don't know what exactly, but they don't say it, but they deny it. There's a big communication thing going on, and how can the OPP help us out here?
Yeah, I think there's a few things in the chat. Transport Canada would be someone that you should be contacting. And then I think Danny said that she just has something to mention
Yeah.
as well.
So I was going to say, this is a really convoluted conversation, unfortunately. And it's best we could probably have a whole webinar on that in and of itself. But the bottom line is anybody flying a drone, whether or not they're allowed to at nighttime, has to comply with Transport Canada's Canadian aviation regulations. There is a section about the requirements for flying any kind of drone at nighttime, and there's licensing as well as specific requirements for that machine as well. So I'd refer you to that in terms of who is allowed on the property at what time. That becomes a completely different issue on who is the person that is the operator of that drone. And again, without knowing the specifics, which this isn't the right time, I'd encourage you to contact your local MSR for that. We could probably have an hour-long webinar on that as well. So maybe a good one for a future time. We'll put that in our notes, right, Joanne?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe something OFA should look into it. All of these things have been done, but
Okay, so I think we are going to wrap it up now. Again, I put the links to all the member service representatives in the area. So if a question didn't get asked and you still want to ask the question because it wasn't answered, feel free to contact a member service representative. My contact information is in there, and I believe Danny also put her information in the chat as well. So Again, thank you so much, Jill, and thank you so much, Drew, for popping on today. This is, a very popular topic, as you know, in rural Ontario. So thank you so much for covering so many questions. There's so many questions that came through. So thank you so much for tackling them. And this has been recorded. And we will be posting it on our OFA website. Again, the information on this is as of today. So, just make sure that you do diligence and contact the right individuals to make sure everything is still current if you have issues. And we do, again, once again, I did put in the chat to our store. We do have no trespassing signs available. So if you are interested, just go onto our store. You can find it is easy by just Googling OFA store, and it will pop right up. So if
There
you
is
are
a farm
interested in that.
property page as well, Joanne, that has
Okay.
all the different, there's been a couple questions about the legislation regulations pertaining to trespass and farm property. So we do have a whole web page on farm property that links you to all the acts that we've talked about and many, many more. So please check that out as well. I've popped that in the chat.
Do you know,
Great.
does it have information about like safeguarding your property against thefts and stuff like that?
We do. Yep, we do. We have
I know
that.
there's
And then and how to talk to unauthorized visitors to your farm as well, the steps that we recommend as well.
Great.
it's great.
Perfect.
Well,
Thanks
thanks
again, Jill
for
and
having
Drew.
us. It was a great partnership there, and I definitely learned a lot too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.